The harvest was in, and it had been a good harvest. They'd worked hard and they got it all in there. Everyone was very pleased and happy. And now they had a couple of weeks in which they could relax a bit. Nothing urgent to be done before they started all over again to get things ready for next year. And in this pause, there was the opportunity for the farmer to thank all his workers by providing them with a harvest supper. And so the men set to work clearing out the barn, clearing out all the rubble and rubbish, sweeping out, and then they put cartwheels and crossed scythes and things up on the wall so it looked a bit like a baronial hall. And then made a big table down the middle, got trestles and trellises, and put planks across the top, and covered it all over with the great big cloths that they used to cover haystacks with. So there's a big table right the way down the middle. And most importantly of all, a big barrel of ale which they pushed into the corner and left to stand. And while the men were busy doing this, the women were busy cooking cakes and pies, stews and things. Everyone was getting ready and everyone was getting excited. And then the day came when that was the day it was going to be. And so the only thing to get ready was themselves. It didn't take the men long. Sort of quick wash under the pump out in the farmyard, brush through the hair, put on a new pair of shoes if they had a new pair of shoes, but that was about it. It didn't take the men very long at all. But the women spent a lot of time doing each other's hair, trying out different hairstyles, putting ribbons in, putting on the dress that they'd worn last year and wondering why it didn't fit, and perhaps swapping dresses around and things like that. But everyone was ready, just in the nick of time before the gong was beaten, and that was the time for the feast to start. And they all walked into the barn to take their places down this great long table. And there was a set procedure. Everyone knew where they had to sit, or everyone who'd been there in previous years anyway. You know, the farmer and his wife were at the head of the table with one or two special guests. And then the workers were ranged down the sides in orders of seniority. You know, the ones who'd been there a long time were at the head of the table, and the lads and the milkmaids and people were down at the other end. And right at the foot of the table was the foreman, down there to keep order and make sure the young ones didn't get up to mischief. And they all stood there by their seats while the parson said grace, and then they all sat down, and the farmer took the opportunity to do a little speech and thank everybody for all their hard work. We've had a really good harvest. We wouldn't have been able to do it without all the hard work that you've been doing all year long. So thank you very much. And this is my way of saying thank you. I want you to eat and drink as much as you can this evening and have a really good time. But you've got to earn it one more time as well, because you don't get the meal for nothing. You've got to provide the entertainment. You've got to sing a song, or recite a poem, or tell us a joke. You've got to do something to entertain us during the course of this meal. And they all knew this was going to happen. They were all prepared. The foreman always, every year for as long as anyone could remember, had sung To Be a Farmer's Boy. One of the other long-time workers always sang John Barleycorn. A little group of the girls had been practising. They were going to get together and sing a hymn. And one or two of the lads had some rather risque jokes that they were going to tell. So everyone was prepared and ready and looking forward to doing it, except for Sandy. Sandy had only started work on there a few months ago, and so he didn't know anyone very well, and he didn't know the farm very well either. He was very young. He was only in his sort of mid-teens, but he was a big lad and really strong. If there was anything heavy that needed moving, you'd get Sandy to come and move it. So he was young, big, strong, but absolutely painfully shy. He wouldn't speak to anybody. If any of the women looked at him, spoke to him, he'd blush run away, get out of the way as soon as he could. And the idea of having to do something in front of all these people, to sing, to talk, to do something, it absolutely mortified him. He didn't know how he was going to do it. And he blushed red and sweat ran down his face and he started to shake, his knees were wobbling. He didn't know what he could do. How was he going to do this? And in the end, in desperation, he got up and he plucked up the courage to go up to the farmer and say, I can't do it. I can't speak to all these people. I'd much rather go away and I won't have my meal. I'll just go, I'll leave. And he was almost crying, sweat and tears. And he got up and he walked out of the hall. And everyone sort of looked in amazement. What's Sandy doing? Why is he going? Oh, well, I'm sure he'll come back in a minute. And he didn't know the farm very well, so he walked across the farmyard towards the meadow. And as he got to the meadow, he heard the festivities beginning. Here's a health unto our farmer, the patron of our feast. And we do hope in all our soul, his soul in heaven. He heard the sound of the singing disappearing as he walked down towards the field. Down at the bottom of the meadow, as you can guess by the name, there was the river. And in the while he'd been on the farm, he'd never really been down to the river. He didn't know where the river flowed to. He had no idea what was the other side. But he was so upset and worried about what was going to happen that he just walked alongside the river, just trying to get himself back together. And he came across an old boat tied up under a bush. And as was a natural thing to do, he got into the boat and sat there. And there was a bit of water in the bottom of the boat, but that looked more like rain that had come in. It didn't look as though the boat was leaking. And then, without him doing anything at all, the boat flowed off from the shore out into the river. And he realised that he didn't have any oars or any paddles. He had no way of controlling the boat at all. He just had to sit in it and see where it took him. And it went out into the middle of the river. The current took it. And Sandy sat there. And he looked down at his feet. And instead of his great big hobnail boots, he saw delicate little shoes. And above these delicate little shoes, instead of big thick corduroy trousers with a patch on the knee, there were thin little legs and the end of a skirt. And when Sandy ran his hands up his chest, he'd never felt them, but he felt what he imagined a woman's breast would feel like. And they looked over the edge of the boat, and instead of big round face with stubbly gingery bristles and tasselled hair, looking back was a woman's face with long hair. And she looked at this face and wondered who it was. And the boat continued sailing across the river until it touched the shore the other side. And Sandra climbed out of the boat, and she stood there on the shore wondering who she was and where she was. Why was she there? What was happening? And she was crying. And she stood there for ages until a young man came along and asked her, "Can I help you? Are you in trouble? What's happening?" And he couldn't get any sense out of her at all. She didn't seem to know who she was or where she was going, what she was doing. So in the end, he took her back to his house, which wasn't very far away, and he gave her a drink and made her comfortable. She still couldn't speak any sense, couldn't make him understand anything. So the only thing for him to do, he took her upstairs and he put her in his bed. And then he went downstairs and slept on the floor in front of the kitchen fire. In the morning, she still didn't seem to know who she was, and she didn't know where she wanted to be, but she seemed quite happy to stay there. And so she stayed there that day, and the next day, and a week, and a month, and it finished up. They were living together and they became very friendly with each other. And then they became more than friendly with each other. So they became a couple. And pretty soon they counted themselves as a married couple. And after a while, she found she was expecting a baby. And they were very happy with this. But she still couldn't really explain how she'd come there and who she was or where she'd come from or anything like that. But they carried on with their life. And the little baby boy grew up quite nicely, became a toddler. And till one morning, Sandra happened to be awake early. And she wandered out of the house and wandered down to the riverbank where her husband had found her. And just down, tied up under a tree, was an old boat. And just for something to do, she got in the boat and sat there. And all by itself, without her doing anything at all, the boat drifted away from the shore. And it drifted across the river. And she looked around and she had no way of controlling it. She just had to sit and go where it took her. And she sat there in the boat, wondering where she was going, until she looked down at her feet. And instead of her little delicate shoes, she saw great big clodhoppery hobnail boots. Where did they come from, she thought. And on her legs there seemed to be big, thick corduroy trousers with patches in the knee. And then they ran their hands up across their chest, and the breasts that she'd fed her baby with didn't seem to be there. Instead there was a big strong man's chest. And he looked over the side of the boat, and instead of her face with the long hair, there was this big, ugly, round face with stubbly chin and gingery hair looking back at him. And when he got to the shore, the other side, he climbed out of the boat and walked up the meadow, shouting, thinking back to where her husband and baby had been. And he walked up the meadow shouting, "My husband, my baby, my husband, my baby." Nothing so strange as this big, strong, strapping lad shouting, "My husband, my baby." And got near the barn, and the barn was lit up. There was something happening in the barn. You could see lights. And then he heard sound. So drink, boys, drink, and see that you do not spill, for if you do, you shall drink too, for that is our master's will. They'd only got that far through the first song. And Sandy walked up to the barn, pushed his way in, shouting, "My husband, my baby, my husband, my baby." And everyone looked at him in amazement. "What on earth are you going on about, Sandy?" And the farmer went back to him and took his arm round, put his arm round him. "What are you going on about, Sandy? What's happened to you? Where did you go?" And he said, "Well, my husband, my baby, my husband." "Come on, sit down, calm down, lad. Tell us what's been happening." And Sandy told the farmer the story that I've just told you. And the farmer looked at him in amazement and said, "Well, I don't know where you went, Sandy, or what you did, but it didn't take you very long. But I'll tell you what, that story that you've just told us will be the best story that we'll hear from anybody tonight. We'll make you the king of our festival. You can sit at the top of the table with me, and everyone can wait upon you, and you'll be the guest of honour."